hand over to Charlotte and David.
Right, I'm sharing the presentation now. Can you see it, David? Oh, yep.
Yeah,
David,
that looks good.
Yeah, David's going to start off.
Yeah, so I'll introduce, I mean, we work for Locality, but I'll tell you a little bit more about Locality in a second. But as Kevin said, this is an update on a session that we did on the 9th of July. And at that point, the government had just changed the rules so that community centres could reopen. So a lot of what we were presenting at that time was, you know, based on the guidance that had come out. There'd been no actual experience from, you know, sort of community organisations about reopening and what's worked, what hasn't worked. So I think today, we'll do a kind of refresh of what we did on the 9th of July, because you know, I noticed there's lots of new faces on this call that weren't on the 9th of July call. Obviously the guidance is changing, and you know, it changed yesterday, you know, in terms of what's permitted, and some of what was announced yesterday does affect what we're presenting today. So we're obviously trying to keep on top of you know, sort of guidance and rules that are changing all the time, and you know, forgive us if we're not able to answer every question as Kevin promised, but we'll do our best, you know, where we don't have the answer to a particular question, to go away and find out for you, you know, through our links to government and all the rest. So yeah, obviously big caveat there, we're not going to be able to cover, answer absolutely everything. So yeah, I think we'll have a segment of today which I mean, we're looking at having breakout rooms, and I think it'll be useful to use those to reflect on any of you that have opened up community spaces, to reflect on, you know, what's working, what's continued to be challenging and difficult, you know, where you think the kind of grey areas are, because I think we'll learn collectively as much from that as anything that we say about the kind of government rules, just some, you know, real kind of user experience. Okay, so coming back to a little bit about Locality, we just yeah, that slide. So we're a national charity, and we're here to provide a voice and support for community organisations across England. We have 1,000 members, so a membership body, and 100 in London, many in Camden also. Alexis from Elfrida is on our board, he's on this call. We provide support to community organisations to help them become stronger and more successful. We work on, you know, everything from governance, finances, business planning, measuring social impact, managing assets, a whole sort of gamut of things to try and improve the role of community organisations across the country. But obviously over the last 6 months, our support has had to shift to doing things like, you know, mothballing organisations and centres, furloughing staff, adapting delivery to food distribution, working with mutual aid groups. And now, you know, our focus about opening up services safely and running community organisations in this new normal. So, you know, we can't claim to be health and safety experts, but we have been working with a lot of our community organisations on this issue. So I think we're getting a sense of what the common issues are. And you know, as I said, we're also keeping abreast of government guidance and looking across our national partners also to identify good practice. So just in terms of what we're planning to cover for the session, it'll be fairly similar to what we did on the 9th, but as I say, incorporating you know, new rules, new guidance, but also the kind of exercise as well. So yeah, I never thought that I'd be giving a presentation that included slides on toilets, hygiene and face coverings, but but here we are. But those are the kind of the main things that we're going to cover as part of the presentation. And then in terms of context, so when we're talking about community centres, these are multi-use facilities that support a wide range of local activity. So they're sort of the nature of the fact that lots of different sometimes commercial, sometimes social activities run within a centre makes interpreting the guidance for community centres even more challenging. Obviously we're dealing with communal spaces, so they're vulnerable to the spread of coronavirus, and whether you're what you do in terms of reopening or continuing to run activities at your own discretion, but obviously some things are permitted by legislation and others aren't. You're also managing workspaces, in many cases, so you have to be responsible, in terms of your your role as an employer. So making sure that you're providing a safe place to work. And again, this is an area where the guidance has changed from encouraging people, back to work to, a couple of days ago, suggesting that if it is safe, if you are able to work from home, then it's better for you to do so, and that's the approach that you need to take with your workers as well. And then just going into a couple of the key principles, for opening up community spaces. First of all, it's down to you to to make that decision about whether it's safe and viable to reopen, and that it may also be prudent to talk to your users, your trustees in some cases, find out from them whether you need to reopen. So just having an approach where you're engaging some of your main stakeholders in that conversation about whether the kind of needs to run services overrides some of the safety issues that you have. You need to familiarise yourself with government guidance. Charlotte will go through some of this. So there's new community centre guidance, there's public health guidance, including Camden and Islington public health guidance for a local level. There's workplace guidance to ensure employees are safe. And you also, need to pass on or cascade some of these responsibilities where you hire out space to other organisations and people. So, you put some onus or, you pass on some of the responsibility to them, but you make sure that they're complying, with your approach to running services and events from the centre. And also, I think it's important to check your insurance cover. You don't want to be liable for anything. So get in contact with your insurance provider, talk to them about what you plan to do and whether that affects your cover. And then on to the next slide, Charlotte. So obviously the period of shielding where certain vulnerable groups were compelled to shield, that is now over, but those individuals can continue to shield. So it's at their own discretion, and therefore whether that's your staff members or volunteers, they can continue to shield if they choose to do so. So you have to think about what's the minimum number of staff that you can function a community space with. So once you've got an idea of who can come and work in a setting, is that minimum? Do you reach that kind of minimum number of staff to make it viable? think about the costs of reopening. There's lots of, you know, as we go through the step-by-step approach, we'll talk about the things that you'll need in terms of, you know, everything from, you know, sort of cleaning products and, you know, in some cases PPE, you know, are you able to afford, you know, these extra costs, and, you know, does that make it difficult, you know, in terms of your overall budget as a community organisation? And then the risk assessment. This is a really you know, key exercise that you need to go through before you you know, choose to reopen a centre. If you're already open, it's an exercise that you need to revisit on a kind of week to week, I would suggest, basis. So, you know, thinking about all the potential hazards and the impact of these hazards, and, you know, the actions that you will use to kind of mitigate, you know, these hazards occurring, and, you know, what you would do if those hazards do actually occur. So, you know, and also allocating responsibility for your staff, and, you know, making sure that that's a kind of collective approach to all of those individuals that are involved in, you know, in the operation. So as I say, that this doing a risk assessment means that you can, and, you know, if you've gone through all the potential issues that might arise out of reopening, you can then say that your centre is COVID secure, and being COVID secure, which means you can, you know, you can put a poster up to say that you're COVID secure and you've been through this process. It means that you're then able to comply with a lot of the government rules around, you know, numbers of people that can use the space. And Charlotte will go into a bit more details about those rules. But doing a risk assessment, I think, is an important first step, and also one that you don't forget about. You come back to, as I say, on a weekly basis, just to check that those original hazards that you identified are still relevant. You know, your experience of running the space hasn't kind of identified other hazards that have cropped up, and, you know, that need to be effectively managed. So I'm going to stop there for now. I don't know if there's any questions. I mean, I haven't gone into any of the detail, and I think that's where Charlotte's going to come more in. It's more just about kind of base principles about opening or, you know, continuing to run a community space. We're happy to take any questions at this stage. None? Okay, well, let's get into the exercise, because that's where we all have to speak to each other anyway. So as I said with the exercise, you know, we've got some experience now for, you know, for people that have open spaces and have the experience of, you know, running spaces within this new normal. So 3 questions there. So have you reopened? What's worked for you, and what are the main questions for you, you know, in terms of your experience of, you know, running spaces with this COVID threat? So you know, identify the kind of things that you found quite challenging, but also highlight things that you thought were going to be challenging, but actually have been fairly straightforward. And I think we're doing this as groups, aren't we, Kevin or
yeah,
Charlotte?
so we're gonna put you into quite small groups so that you can have a good conversation. And I'm going to do that now. And how long are we going to do with this one, David and Charlotte?
I think 15 minutes.
Right. Okay. So the this will, if you haven't done this before, you'll probably get an invitation, but even if you don't click on the invitation, it will send you off into the room. So we're going to have quite small rooms, hopefully just 4 or 5 people. Can we get somebody within the group as well to share back to the main group as well, just the kind of main, you know, the main summary of the answers
from each would be really helpful.
Okay. And you'll get a warning when there's a minute or two to come back, and we'll bring you back. So don't worry, you won't end up lost in cyberspace. So Lindsay, are you joining a room? So Lindsay, it's just you and me. I think you should have had an invite to join a room. Give me a shout if that hasn't worked, or I can move you. So Lindsay, if you're there, I can't manually move you by the looks of things.
Okay, thanks, everyone. Did you find those conversations useful to start with? Okay. We're going to start. So I asked each group just to nominate somebody. You don't have to cover everything. Just maybe a couple of key things that came out of that discussion in terms of questions or issues or experiences. So does somebody want to start?
I'm happy to start for our group. We had West Hampstead Women's Centre and Women in Health, and me with Community Partnerships Camden Council. In terms of questions, there was a request to clarify requirements around visors and masks, especially for reception staff, and whether a screen around the reception, especially if it's a nice and high one, would be sufficient, or whether visors are still required or masks are still required. So that's a very specific question. Another point was having some challenges with people wanting to come back to the center. People wanting to come back to the center, but maybe having some difficulty with reassuring people about the safety of coming back for services, especially for more hands-on services like body therapies. So maybe discussing some ideas on how to engage with people to reassure them about the safety aspect of things, but also adding to that the challenge that not everybody uses social media, and that limits the reachability of people in trying to do that. Other than that, both centers seem to be doing quite well in terms of reopening. People are eager to come back and are coming back, and they seem to have been doing quite well in terms of having the risk assessments and the measures in place to be able to deliver their services and to balance keeping activities online that work well online to free up the space in person for the activities that are more suited for in-person activities. So I think that's a brief summary that covers it. If everybody else wants to say anything in the group that I might have missed.
No, that's really good, Zenabi. Who else wants to summarize from their group?
I can unmute. So I was in a group with Jan, Linda and Francis. So we had sort of community halls, library and council offices. There are some examples of things that were working, that were sort of good things, were that in general it was felt people were getting quite used to bringing their own stuff like equipment, that kind of thing. And also there's a nice example of a notice board where a notice board going up sort of just made people think there was actually something going on, even without an awful lot of activity going on. So that was quite a nice sort of example. The sort of big questions were around the balance of costs of opening up and all the additional stuff that has to be done, and all that extra work versus the kind of income and actually it being feasible at all, with groups particularly who don't want to come back and hire space because they can't get enough people in, so that's also an issue. And the sort of sense of duty of being a community hub. So there's a sense of duty in the community to open up and have places that people can connect again. And of course, the ongoing question of, you know, catching COVID. So those were the sort of key points, really. Our group.
Thanks, Donna. Okay, swiftly moving on. Lewis.
Yeah, happy to go for our group. So it was me, Ira, Nazil and Laura. So we had a real mix of spaces and also groups that we were working with. And I think some of the key things that came up within our discussion, I think a key one was around sort of like the moral perspective of bringing, I feel like it's kind of like a mini version of what the government's dealing with, in like, you're like, well, we probably shouldn't do things to keep people safe from COVID, but then are the impacts of not doing things worse than if we do, in terms of the effects, therefore, of leaving people at home? And I know Laura and I are mentioning particularly, like, obviously a lot of the groups that are most vulnerable are also the most isolated. Like, that's the really unfortunate correlation that comes with COVID. Another thing that Ira brought up was actually previously there was quite a lot of distinction between like outdoor and indoor space, whereas now I think in an effort to make it easier, but also probably for her as a farm more tricky, is that they've made it more generic, and that's like when you think that outside space is actually easier to do stuff in, it's now not so easy. And then sort of a couple of other bits that we talked a bit about cost, we talked about the sort of like sectioning off different parts of buildings, etc., and how stuff, but to Donna's point earlier, like obviously less viable sometimes in terms of how much you can support people. And then I suppose maybe just the last point was just around really wanting to do stuff, but definitely feeling still like it's not, like, through no one's fault, it's really not clear of what is going to happen next, whether you should open up, etc., etc., etc. So yeah, just a level of like unsureness basically that's still surrounding it all.
Thanks, Lewis. Have we got any more groups? How many groups were there in total, Kevin?
Trisha's volunteering.
Okay, Trisha, take it away.
Hi, I had our group were 3 community centres and Ricky from VAC. All of us have all reopened our centres, and we were having a conversation on how different, you know, the reaction has been since reopening and being COVID safe. So Primrose Hill Community Centre opened back in June, and they've had quite a good number of people returning back to using their space. Their space is a lot larger than ours, internal space. So they've had apparently two-thirds of their groups coming back and calling. They've also reopened the library as well, but are finding that people aren't using the library as much as they were previously, and they're going to revisit how they can work possibly online and around the community regarding the library. They also contacted a lot of their elderly over the last week to see if they wanted to come back to do yoga classes. Maybe the numbers might change now since yesterday, but things seem to be going very well at Primrose Hill. West Hampstead Community Association reopened on the 1st of September. They, like us, have been getting, they're opening up their activities, but the numbers aren't very high. As in the people actually accessing the building, and they have their predominant thing with income is rents. So if you've got bookings and rents and suddenly people don't want to use your spaces, then you're put in a financial situation that many community associations are dealing with at the moment, especially if they're not reopened. Ricky from VAC said that they're still all working from home and or over their phone or online, and the changes of roles have slightly, so I agreed certain staff that we've had to kind of deploy into different roles so that they still have a job, and to make sure that things are covered, and finding out new skills, etc. So doing stuff online where people would never have done it before, and changing activities. For instance, the way that we've done it here is we got some funding from, I can't remember the funder, but we got some funding from the lottery to do an online project. So we are able to have tutors in the classrooms with people that can access, that physically want to come in, that couldn't access online, specifically the elderly. So they would come in to do the class physically, but those that can access it from home online, then they would access it as we would have. We've got a tablet that's on a tripod in each of the classes, and it does live streaming to those people. And it's proved quite popular, and it's also working really well. But the numbers at Castlehaven, as in the numbers coming into the building, is dramatically lower than it was. So that's what I'm talking about. If that helps.
Thanks, Tricia. Is there anyone else apart from our group? No, I think so. For our group, we heard from Brian, who has been involved in reopening community cafe for the Irish Centre. I guess one of the kind of bits of learning that came out of what he said was the amount of effort they put into liaising with the users on reopening, consulting them about whether they should reopen, and also talking about some of the restrictions that would be in place. And he talked about, you know, a group of users who, you know, have health concerns about coming, and then there's another group that think that everything's a bit too draconian and don't want to wear masks. So it's kind of a split between the two. Rachel talked about the homeless centre that's been open during the whole time, and the difficulty of combining a place that, you know, does a combination of health, community, cafe style activities, and trying to find, you know, the guidance that kind of fits best with, you know, with the setup that they have. She also mentioned that there have been some issues around some people not wanting to wear masks, and how do we verify if somebody says that they cannot, you know, they do not have to wear a mask because they have a reason, how to verify that. And then Stuart talked about some of his experience of working in Lewisham, you know, saying that some community organisations there have been cautious, while others have been a bit more gung-ho about, you know, ignoring a lot of the legislation. Also saying that some are concerned about staying afloat, so, you know, more concerned about getting in their users, and, you know, keeping afloat as an organisation, and that overriding some of the health and safety concerns. And Rowena from Mind talked about, you know, kind of slowly building up activities from group activities to one-to-one, doing coffee mornings and then sort of guided walks. So just slowly building up, but then seeing the rules starting to reverse the other way, and, you know, just having some concerns about what that means in terms of what now needs to be scaled back. So I've taken some notes from, you know, from all of your feedback. What I'll do is I'll just perhaps park some time at the end to revisit some of these issues, and I'll put a kind of summary note in the chat so we can come back to some of these issues, and, you know, see if we can make, you know, collectively get to some of the answers. And yeah, so I'm going to hand over to Charlotte now, just to get into a bit more of the detail around.
Sharon and Emily are waving furiously.
Oh, have we missed the group?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Let's go out of the presentation then, Charlotte. Sorry about that. So Emily, did we miss your group?
Yes, but
I'm really sorry. Really sorry. Yeah, just give us some of the you know, the main summary of what
can I remember?
Yeah.
We were 2 staffed community centres and 2 completely voluntary run community centres, and I think the main things that came up were the benefits of the Castlehaven Community Centre were using a lot of Zoom in order to run classes and parallelly have people involved through Zoom, and they were also managing, oh, I can't see where you are, but managing outdoor sports spaces as well. So that was a whole different issue on following sports guidelines. And then the Highgate Library had been completely closed down by the council. So what they did was being that was the council decision. So they're waiting for that, if I'm right, for that ability to open again. But there's a lot of requests from the public to be able to use the space. For us, we have slightly kept the community together through weekly Zoom readings. So that's been a benefit. And we've also, although all our rent is from hire out, usually, we've decided to use the 25,000 for paying our rent to the council, and for our door takings at the moment to go to the performers, in recognition that people's individual financial situations are really bad. So we're sort of trickling down some of that, the money that was given to ratepayers down to
We've only had
users. But we've only been open this week, so that was the intention. But whether that happens or not, I don't know if there was anything else somebody else wanted to add, because we didn't take notes.
Discuss the barriers. I mean, one of the barriers is with the elder generation. Yeah. Not all of them are IT confident. Not all of them have a smartphone, a tablet, or a laptop, or a young person around them who can show them how to use it. And the affordability, not just in young people, not just in older generation, own families as well, not able to afford to have technology to engage with us. On the level of still accessing local community-based organizations and stuff, and also fundraising. Some of us being charities, we end up having to fundraise to keep ourselves ticking, and we've not been able to do some of the nice stuff that we physically do on an annual basis. Following Boris's announcement, we're having to really think about what it is we can do, further restrictions, what the worst case scenario comes off if the country goes back into lockdown again, what the implications of us doing, using our building for those that don't have access to technology to come in to continue to participate. Because all of that is very important to individuals' mental health and, well-being as well.
I mean, what we've thanks Sharon and Emily. I mean, what we've found, we've got a lot of examples of community organisations and spaces that have kind of pivoted during lockdown to food distribution and a range of other things. So it's it might be worth thinking about it along those lines, in terms of if the things that you normally do aren't feasible, but what can you be doing to support the vulnerable people in your area, and to address some of the specific issues of lockdown. So yeah, just I guess that's kind of one to consider if you're if you have space and resources. Often we've heard about mutual aid groups working quite well with community organisations. Sometimes they haven't worked well together, but we have a lot of good examples of where they have. So yeah, thinking about it along those lines. Okay.
Very quickly on what was being said earlier, one of the most successful things we've had, I'm in Islington, in quite a large community centre, got a lot of rooms, and quite a lot of people are coming in individually booked to use the computers because they don't have them themselves or can't do homework because of multiple people in the same room. And that is a service that's been really beneficial to people, being able to get in touch with their families, participate in some of these Zoom things, which they can't do at home.
Yeah, yeah. good point. Okay. Okay, time is kind of moving along, so we will we'll kind of have the session with Charlotte, and as promised, we'll come back into some of these sort of key issues for the last part of the session. So over to you, Charlotte.
Right, sharing my screen. So now we get into the nitty-gritty about social distancing. The first slide is really just a reminder, everybody's got this, I'm sure, down to a T by now. And it comes from, as David mentioned earlier, the guidance for the safe use of multi-purpose community facilities. A lot of it has stayed the same, but since there have been some updates in September, some of the sections have been updated, particularly the ones around social distancing and the rule of 6, which we've all heard about. So the guidance says clearly, follow the guidelines on social distancing. We're talking 2 meters or a meter with risk mitigation. So we're talking about masks, ventilation, and all the other things that they recommend. The risk assessment is very important that David mentioned. So of course you'll all be risk assessing continually, I'm sure. And the size of the building is critical. Obviously, you've all been looking at your buildings and how you can use them. The total floor space is really important, the likely pinch points. And it's really important to be very clear to your users. It's an issue that came up in our group, how you actually communicate with them and how you manage their expectations. That's something that we might pick up again at the end. Right, so now we come down into the real nitty-gritty about what is and what isn't allowed. And I know that there's a lot of confusion about this. And when you first read the guidance, if you're trying to speed read it, it's really hard to actually get under what the rules are. So hopefully I'll be able to make it clear to you now. So what they're saying is the new guidance that they've inserted into the guidance for safe use of multipurpose community facilities, it's the rule of 6 that they're applying now. So that applies to everybody in the community centre. So, but there are some exceptions, which I will go through in a moment. But generally, if you're running an informal or formal adult social group, that's clubs and societies and activities, they must be no greater than 6. But the caveat here is if you are running a social group with 6 people and they are basically, I'll read it out verbatim, where activities where there is a significant likelihood of groups of 6 interacting, then it shouldn't take place. So I'm going to repeat that again on the next slide. But one of the exceptions here is support groups. So if you're running a support group, then they can take place in gatherings of any number of community facility if organised by a business, a charitable, benevolent or philanthropic institution or a public body to provide mutual aid, therapy or any other form of support. So the distinction here is if it's just a social group, WI, you know, getting people together, then the rule of 6 applies unless they're going to be mingling, and then it can't happen. But if it's a support group, and we've got a list of support groups coming up, then it can happen if it's more than 6. Sounds like a riddle, doesn't it, really? So I'm going to go on to the next slide. So just to repeat that, community facilities are not permitted to hold informal or formal social groups, clubs and activities unless they're limited to groups of 6. And but if you are running a social group or club or activity and the likelihood that you'll be mingling, as Priti Patel calls it, and socializing, therefore breaking the law, then they should not take place at all. So we're talking social groups, things like clubs, choirs, informally organised indoor, outdoor sports.
Yes, clubs, choirs.
Right, so basically, would you like me to stop at that point, or shall I plough on? Right, I'll plough on. So I'm going to talk more the rule of 6. So obviously everybody's heard about the rule of 6. From Monday the 14th of September, when meeting friends and family you do not live with or you have formed a support bubble with, you must not meet in a group of more than 6, indoors or outdoors. This is against the law, and the police will have the powers to enforce these legal limits, including to issue fines. So it's pretty clear that you aren't allowed to do that. So I've now got the next 2 slides. Sorry, there's a lot of information on here, but the next 2 slides are what are the exceptions to the rule of 6. So we've got about 10, I haven't counted, but about 10, 11, 12 exceptions. So number 1 exception is work or the provision of voluntary or charitable services. So your place of work is an exclusion. Early years and youth. So we know that we can go up to higher numbers there, and there are specific rules around those. Registered childcare, education or training. Support groups, the ones that I mentioned earlier. Now these don't have to follow the rule of 6. It's for formally organised groups to provide mutual aid, therapy, long-term illness, bereavement, recovering addicts, new parents, sexuality or gender. So there's quite a long list of the support groups that are still allowed to happen in groups of more than 6.
May I stop you at that point?
You may.
It's the point I'm having difficulty with. I run a large community centre, or manage a large community centre in Islington, is when a social group becomes a support group. So, for example, I have a coffee morning for elderly and disabled people. The question about whether that is a support group or a social event is moot.
Yeah, it's a grey area, isn't it? And I think what they're talking about is therapy, and with vulnerable groups. So I don't think that's clear myself. I couldn't say that's falls into one or other category, but we can have a discussion about that maybe at the end. What, you know, and other people will have other activities that are grey. So can we park that and discuss when is it support and when is it a social group? And I think you're going to have to take a view on that and do lots of risk assessment, but we'll come back to that. But thanks for raising the points. I think that's completely justified. So
sorry, Charlotte, I have a very quick question about the work, voluntary or charitable services. Do you know if that means if you have a registered charity number, you are a charitable service, or you are providing a service free of charge? Do you know how they've defined charitable service?
I haven't seen that defined anywhere, but it doesn't mean it's not. And I have read through most of the guidance. It's actually quite broad brush, a lot of the guidance. It's not, it doesn't go into depth, but can we, David, are you happy to make a point of that one? Make a note of it and we can go back and have a look.
Yeah, sure. I'm making notes now, and I'll add these to the list.
Can I just butt in there and say that I saw in the national press that the larger charities are considering organised volunteering events to be to fall under work, but events such as fundraising to not fall under work and so be cancelled.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. That's helpful. I think everybody will have a view on this, and it'd be useful to have a discussion about it because there's no sort of 100% clarity on this. So on to the next slide. This is the next list of exceptions to the rule of 6, and I'm surprised to see singing and wind and brass on there, given that we know that like they are, you know, there's a concern about transmission when people are singing and playing instruments, but there is some specific guidance on that. It's worth having a look at that if you have got people playing instruments and singing. Wedding and civil partnership ceremonies and receptions, you might have picked up that weddings are now a maximum of 15. I think that's my understanding from the new rule changes yesterday. But we think that funerals are still at 30. So if anybody has got weddings in their venue, or holding weddings at the moment, we'll try and clear that up, but we think that's 15 maximum now. Other religious and belief-based life cycle ceremonies, up to 30 people in a public place. I did check the guidance on places of worship, and it hasn't been updated since last night, so it's still talking about 30. So we need to revisit that one when the guidance has been updated. But providing support to a vulnerable person. So is that what you're doing with your coffee mornings? Is that providing support to a vulnerable person? That's a grey one that we'll have another look at that. Support groups. Now this is the list that they've provided. This is one of the exceptions to the rule of 6 with more detail attached. So I've said it, and I've put it all down there in absolute word for word. Support groups can take place in gatherings of any number in a public place if the support group is organised by a business, a charitable, benevolent or philanthropic institution or a public body to provide mutual aid, therapy or any other form of support to its members or those who attend its meetings. So it looks like from this reading, the coffee morning with vulnerable older people can take place, although I wouldn't lay my life on it. So those support groups can be supporting victims of crime, including domestic abuse, those with or recovering from addictions, alcohol, narcotics, other substance addictions, addictive patterns of behaviour, new and expectant parents, those with or caring for persons with any long-term illness, disability or terminal conditions who are vulnerable. Well, that's interesting. Those facing issues related to their sexuality or identity, including those living as lesbian, gay, bisexual or transgender, or those who have suffered bereavement. So this is an exception to the legal gathering of a limit of 6. More informal groups can take place with multiple groups of 6 as long as they do not have more than 6 people mingling socially at any one time. I do know that at this moment in time, the policy team at Locality is in communication with the government trying to clarify a lot of this, and I think that list, I can't believe that list won't grow, but at the moment that's all that it says on there. Any thoughts at this point?
Can I just ask about room hirers who are organisations having formal work meetings? Is that work or charitable purpose?
So room hirers who are having formal meetings?
Yes, so people from outside who have hired our room to have a formal meeting.
Would you say that it would depend on who the organisation is and whether it's in the course of their work? I think we'd probably need to look into that and who they are.
Oh yes, it is the course of their work, yes, yeah.
This is basically, again, where the hiring agreement, do you have a hirers agreement?
Yes, yes.
Like some wording reflecting this needs to be added into your hiring agreement, so the responsibility is put onto them and not you. So I think it's about taking the right wording and putting it in your hiring agreement to make sure that they have to do their own risk assessment and they have to be doing it in the course of their work. Otherwise they'll be, they'll have to follow the guidelines of rule of 6. So if they're undertaking it in the course of their work, depends who they are, if they,
yeah, they're charities looking after vulnerable people, very vulnerable people.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine that would be an exception to the rule of 6, but I would put the responsibility on them into your hiring agreement.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Charlotte.
David.
Sorry, Charlotte.
Oh, hello.
Hi, it's Isabel. I work at Voluntary Action Camden.
Oh, hi.
Hi, we run and facilitate peer support groups in the community with community organisations, and we work with Mind in Camden. And just you gave that list, And, you know, it doesn't say mental health as such. I know it says therapy. And, you know, as I said, we run peer support group community. And what happens when we have more than 6 people coming together? Do you think that would be allowed? Because we haven't been able to do that during lockdown, have any sessions in the community. We've been doing everything online or on Zoom or other facilities. So we really need to start doing that. And it seems like it's still a grey area. It seems like we might be able to do it, but if the group comes together in a forum, such, for example, Castlehaven Community Centre, they come together and then they leave that room and they start talking outside in the park, then does that become, you know, something different? Does that become mingling? So, you know, how does that work? So that's an area that we need to look at.
Well, I think that's a really, really good point. It sounds to me, if you're supporting people with mental health issues, then that does sound like an exception. And please feel free to butt in anybody who doesn't agree with me, because this is all like interpreting the, you know, the minutiae. It sounds to me that that is therapy and support, and therefore an exception to the rule of 6. Maybe it's about making very clear to the users once they leave that they're not allowed to be mingling or socializing, because that's against the law.
There is definitely an issue about, because the community centre I run has a lot of different rooms, we can have several different groups of 6 happening. We can control their mingling within the centre using different exits and all the rest of it. But what happens when they get just outside the premises? How much responsibility do we have for the fact that several groups of 6 then coalesce and start chatting to each other just outside the centre?
Surely if they leave the premises, there has to be some individual responsibility on their side if they're capable and have the capacity to do that. I don't know if you guys have a driveway or whatever, but we effectively say, from the driveway onwards, that's your issue and you will be fined. From the driveway inside, it's our issue and we will be fined. I think there just has to be a bit of a balance between, because we can't accept responsibility from everyone doing stuff outside once the sessions are finished.
Yeah, that's kind of my take on it, but we do get some complaints from people saying, well, because you're running all these groups, that's why people are collecting in large clumps outside.
I mean, you can't follow them down the road, and how far down the road should you follow them? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's part of, I mean, you can do your best to communicate that to the users, but you can't be responsible, or maybe, I don't know, it's another grey area, isn't it? And I think we should be making a note of that and taking it down and, you know, trying to get some clarity on that.
I think it's all about best practice and the amount of sort of things you've put in place to ensure that you're trying your best to communicate that. So signage, communication, telling people to show anyone who's going to turn up. So if Public Health England turn up, you can say, well, here are all our policies, here are the signage, here's the end of the sessions, and this is what we've done to put in place, you know, things to ensure that that doesn't happen. However, obviously, we don't have individual responsibility for these people. So as soon as they leave the centre in any capacity, that's their gig. And here's what we've put in place to reduce it while we're here. It's about showing that you can do best practice.
Yeah, that's kind of was my point, that really getting those signs up saying, do not congregate outside and so on. And that's about as far as we can go.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, that's useful to hear that conversation. The next slide is a checklist, if I can get onto it, from Camden and Islington Public Health, which it might be useful as part of your risk assessment. So obviously, if you're going to do some activity that's going to take you onto a red box, then you can't do it. So it might just be a useful tool to help your thinking when you're deciding what you can and can't do. The test and trace thing is still in place, and this has been developed, and I'll go on to talk about QR reading in a moment, but it's still, the guidance is still the same, that you have to take a temporary record. But if you're running a particular type of activity or organisation, the advice has changed, and it goes on to, you've got to have the QR reader outside, but I'll talk about that now. then here's a list of what to do about asking your visitors if they have coronavirus symptoms. Do people ask people who come into their centre whether they have symptoms? Is that something you're doing at the moment?
We at Castle Haven, we've got a track and trace system on a tablet, and as people come in, we've got a temperature thermometer, which is infrared, and we just take their temperature coming in, and it's about, I think, any temperature above 37.8, we wouldn't let them in the building. It's got to be 37.8 as the guidance, so we do that already in our reception area.
So Sharon, you're taking people's temperatures and stopping them coming in if they've got a temperature?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also on the, I'm Sharon's boss, but just to let everyone know. But also on the tablet that we take in people's data about them coming in, we do ask them if they have had the symptoms as well. So we go through a whole process before they even get through. We're very lucky. We've got like it's a bit like a pod. They walk through the front door. They can't get into the building unless they go through another door. So that reception area is kind of our, and then we decontaminate it when if they are ill, then we send them out, and then we obviously do a whole clean of the reception area before anybody else gets in there. So we're very thorough, and we're not allowing anybody in our building without masks either, especially even before yesterday's announcement, we weren't allowing that anyway. So the only people that are exempt, but maybe not now because of yesterday's news, is the staff, and we're all separate in our own offices, and those that work together have to sit a good 2 meters apart. There's no congregating in corridors or pinch points as well. Downstairs we've got a one-way system as well. So we have been very thorough. But I think that the front door thing, it's not a difficult thing to do, but you need a confident person that's going to welcome people in, and there still needs to be a warm welcome. Some people will not be happy, but I think the majority of people that have come in are very glad that we go through that process, because they then feel safe when they're in the building.
Yeah, they feel that they feel a level of reassurance, don't they?
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. Is anyone else doing that level of checking?
Yeah, so at Women in Health, we're doing it so we are checking our clients are being checked by practitioners, their temperature. We check the staff and the practitioners' temperatures. And then on the screen on entry, because the reception team are in a bubble of perspex, there is the list. We ask the clients, can they confirm that they don't fall under any of the questions in the list of symptoms? And on our track and trace list, we then tick it off. And then the practitioner will relay their temperature if need be, if it was high. So that's kind of our protocol for when clients are arriving and they have to wear face masks before they enter the building. And we try and say, if you haven't already got an appointment, then they can't really enter. And we've got on our booking system, it sends them text messages 24 hours before they arrive, reminding them to arrive with a mask on and to bring a spare one in case it gets soiled or gets contaminated. That's what we try to do, to give them a bit more preparation before they even arrive at the centre.
That's really helpful to hear about that. Yeah, thank you. That's good to hear a couple of examples. I'm going to just go on now and talk about the additional requirements for organisations providing hospitality, tourism and leisure, as well as council facilities. So anybody working in local authority facilities, the venues must ask at least one member of every party of customers or visitors of up to 6 people to provide their name and contact details. Keep a record of all staff working on their premises and shift times on a given day and their contact details. Keep these records of customers, visitors and staff for 21 days. Display an official NHS QR code. Are people already doing that then? Are people putting the QR poster up? Right, so basically the list of organisations, they provide a list of who this applies to, and I'll just have a look at the list. So if there's anybody here who is working in, I know we've got a couple of local authority buildings here, but anybody working in or providing indoor sport and leisure centres, museums and galleries, public libraries, music recording studios, heritage locations, facilities for use by elite and professional sports people, clubs providing team sporting activities. That great list. Now you have to display an official NHS QR code poster at the entrance, and there's a link there where you go onto that link, and it basically creates a poster for you. So if you think that you're working in any of those sectors or in a local authority building, you have to then put that poster up, and then the organisations must have a system for individuals who do not have a smartphone or the NHS COVID-19 app to provide their contact details. So if you work in any of those sectors, there's specific guidance for you that I would look at. Any questions?
What if the volunteers running the space don't have smartphones in order to receive people's QRness or whatever?
So say that again, Emily. If the what?
Well, what happens if the people who are running the event or whatever don't have smartphones? So what happens to all that information that you don't have access to?
As an addendum to that, could you take us gently through the whole QR thing? What's it for? What does it do? Where do we get it? And what do we do with it?
It's an online track and trace system, and you have to display that poster outside your organisation, and people with smartphones coming in have to put their phone on it and then go through a system on their phone. It's part of the track and trace system. So I don't know exactly if other people had experience of using that. I've never used one myself, but I presume it takes you onto like the government run track or trace. So has anybody had experience of using it that they can help tell us more about it?
I haven't actually used it, but I think what it is when you do scan the code on all Android phones.
Oh, we're losing you. It's good information. Losing you. Can't hear you, unfortunately. It's interesting.
Until we get her back.
I've used it.
You've used it?
Yes, I went bowling and I had to put the QR code in.
Oh.
And what it does, once you put the QR code in, it pops up with the company's details, NHS details, and it asks you for all your personal details in it, because it knows which location you're going to, and then it gets stored somewhere on their cloud system.
So it's tracing you where you've been. So basically, if somebody at that bowling centre was then showed to have COVID, they could contact you to tell you to self-isolate.
Yes.
So it's basically a self-isolating system, isn't it? Where it's basically they can track you and tell you to self-isolate.
Yeah.
So it's a means of being centrally controlled rather than being done by an individual organisation.
Yeah.
In answer to Emily's question, in her not being able to use it isn't a problem, therefore. The idea is like, in an ideal world, everyone would be able to scan it on there, because then, like you say, you could track from where they've been for however long, and the NHS could do that stuff for you. Whereas if you don't have it, it's just that you have to collect that manually and then provide that information yourself. So the QR code is a way of just bypassing you having to manually tell them. But it's not a problem, because clearly not everyone has the ability to use QR codes with their phones, etc., etc.
So it's an alternative for people signing in rather than anything else.
It's like, it's the digital it's a better way because it allows there to be more accurate understanding of where people have been, but it's just the equivalent of.
Thanks.
I think
So it's either or then, yeah.
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 It's either or, yeah.
Yeah.
I think for the purposes of this group today, as far as I can see, the area of uncertainty would probably, well, in Camden, would be maybe around the community libraries, because obviously the libraries have to take part in this because it covers public facilities. But we do have 2 or 3 community libraries where the library has been taken over and run by an associated community centre. So Primrose Hill run Primrose Hill Library, Belsize Park Library is run by the Winch. So I think that is probably an area that needs a bit of clarification.
I think they still have to take part in it. They're still running that type of industry that falls under leisure. And so even though it might not be run by the local authority anymore, it still has to take part in the NHS QR code poster system. And it saves a job for them as well. Like we said, it means they don't have to collect people's information. So they go onto that website and create their own poster that they display outside the library. So sorry, go on.
No, sorry, I thought you had finished, Charlotte.
Oh, no, carry on.
Now, I just wanted to remind everyone that for those of you who use Time to Spare, that's one of the ways that you can do the manual but still digital tracking of who's coming in. So as Charlotte said, you either have people registering themselves essentially through the QR code that they scan on their phone. You don't have to do anything other than have the paper that has the code somewhere displayed so they can easily access it. Or if they're not going to do that either because they haven't got the smartphone to do it, or because they refuse to, you still have to track them as users of the space and therefore take their details. And you can either do it with a system that you already have, or you can use Time to Spare. And if you want help with that, you can get in touch with our team, and we can put you in touch with Time to Spare if you haven't got that set up. But that's a very easy system as well, just to take that information in.
Thank you. That's helpful.
And it's free also. Sorry, just for those of you who haven't heard about it before, it's free for charities. Yeah.
Time to Spare. Do you want to put it in the chat?
Sure.
Thank you. So I'll just hurry through 3 more slides. So we're talking about risk assessments. We've already covered this before, so it's basically you're all doing it already, just looking at the building and making sure that you're using all the exit and entry points so you can do one-way flows and managing times of arrival. This is stuff that you've all been doing. This is use of face masks has changed, obviously. So face coverings, well, it changed again last night, but people coming in will be required to wear a face covering unless they have a reasonable excuse. I don't know what that might include, but I'm sure there's some grey areas there. So if users need to eat or drink, then clearly they have to remove it. And then undertaking exercise, they're allowed to remove it, but I don't know if that's changed since last night. I'm really not sure. So maybe we need to update on, where we are with face masks. So all venues should ensure that steps are taken to avoid people needing to unduly raise their voices. So no shouting, playing music.
You can sing.
Pardon?
But you can sing now.
Yes, you can sing, but there are specific rules around that. So I refer to the guidance on performance. So just to be aware about, people not shouting. So I'm going to pause at that point and hand back to David, unless there's any further questions, but maybe we'll have a discussion at the end when we've finished the slides. David?
Yep. So just the slides that are at the end here, I'm not going to go through them in detail. They were slides that we used at the last presentation. We'll make sure that these are circulated. I'll just, explain what each slide does, and then you can follow up yourself on the details. So neighbourhood level considerations, this comes back to the discussion earlier about people leaving at the same time. So I think within the community centre guidance, there's some suggestion that you should also think about the other businesses or community centres or services that are kind of being operated within your neighbourhood. If your centre is on a high street, then it'd be good to sort of check in with your neighbours about leaving times, and sort of added pressure on sort of local transport. And then some slides on cleaning. So as sort of suggested that you'll be well versed in these areas now around kind of making sure that you're cleaning surfaces that are kind of frequently touched, that you've got a schedule in place that your users and staff could see, that everyone understands how often things are cleaned, and you're kind of reassuring your users. And then around hygiene, wait for the slides change. So yeah, just asking people to wash their hands as usual, using the 20 seconds, lots of soap and water. And then on toilets, again, just having added care in terms of cleaning. The stuff around kind of Legionnaire's disease was something that if you've had a place closed for a long time, then you might have kind of issues around the water in your toilet. So it's just ideally even during lockdown, you've kind of flushed your toilet regularly, so that it's that isn't going to be an issue, but that's what we want to be aware of. And again, just making sure that you've got a schedule, cleaning schedule in place. Communication and engagement. I mean, this has come up as an issue, really, how you engage your users. Somebody earlier talked about social media and that not reaching everyone, but within my group, kind of heard good examples about making contacts with your users, talking about your approach, I guess overcoming fears, health fears, but also I guess making some users prepared for the restrictions that are going to be in place, so that if they are feeling that it is going to be draconian, if you've had that conversation with them before, then at least they're going to be prepared for how the service or centre is going to be different, and perhaps will be less outraged. Fear of going out. We talked about this at the last session, that the difficulties with reopening up and encouraging people to come back and use community spaces. I think Lewis earlier was talking about the the health risks versus the health, the sort of community well-being type benefits of bringing people together. And I think that continues to be something that you'll be looking to balance. And then there's lots of signage examples that you can download from the government website. So if you need sort of help with just explaining what you're doing, at your centre, then there's lots of a big variety of kind of signs that might be able to help you, that have already been designed and just need printing off. And then obviously there's an enforcement issue. So it's just being aware that if you don't complete a risk assessment, that it could constitute a breach of health and safety law. And I mentioned earlier that the issue around insurance as well, and persistent breaches can lead to a criminal offence. And so I'll stop there in terms of slides. We've put in some links to some of the main guidance documents, but we've got 15 minutes left, so I'll just scrolling up on the chat just to kind of go through what I kind of summarised as the sort of key issues that were raised, and I just thought we could, you know, these have been parked, and perhaps we can pick 2 or 3 of these, and particularly interested if people have got some additional insights or experience for dealing with these issues. So I'll go through them. The balance between users who want to stay safe versus those who think this is all a bit draconian, and you know, finding the right tone to, you know, to sort of keep those 2 camps satisfied. Verify, you know, in terms of mask wearing and where there's exemptions, how do we verify that? So there are a list of exemptions for mask use, but if particular users are deciding that they're going to invent reasons for them not wearing a mask, how do we deal with that as an issue? Engaging, liaising with users about reopening or changing rules within your space, how, you know, be good to get some insights about how to best do that. The health risk versus the community well-being issue, how, you know, we run the risk of further alienating people who are vulnerable, lonely, socially isolated. How, you know, what are the ways, and maybe some of the thinking around what's worked online come into that discussion. Financial concerns, you know, so people feeling compelled to open because they're worried about the financial future of their organisation. What's a support group versus a social group? What's a charitable activity? Is it a charitable, does it have to be a charitable organisation, or you could define a charitable activity differently? Learning from what's working online, and combining with that with access to digital, and that being kind of an important new area, and the duty of care for those leaving the premises together. That's quite a long list, and we're not going to get through them all, but be useful if we could choose a couple, 2 or 3 of those to talk about in a bit more detail. So any nominations? It's all in the chat, by the way, if you wanted to just
summarise. The one that I'm getting a lot of pressure about in my centre in Islington are the church hirers, and particularly the evangelical Christian churches whose audience participation is quite high, and the sort of impromptu declaiming and singing along is, originally we said no religious services because that there was a lot of loud audience participation. It came under the sort of shouting and singing. But looking at the guidance last night, I'm a bit confused about where we're up to with that one. And they provide a lot of income, they provide a service for a lot of people, and they're ringing me 2 or 3 times a day. I field a dozen calls during the week about this, about when they can come back, and I'm a little confused.
The word of God will keep it outdoors when it's not raining.
Can anybody help with that query, or have some suggestions?
Finsbury Park, my suggestion.
Just to say, we as well have a church group that come here on a Friday and a Sunday, and sadly we've not allowed them to come back, just purely on the fact of the singing and the very emotional sessions that they have. So like you, we are a little bit confused, and we do get conversations, well, getting them asking us whether or not they can use our space again. But our space is quite, our room that they use is quite small, and we can only allow 6 people in it, or 7 people. So they may not want to come back because the size is a lot smaller than their group. But just to let you know that we're not allowing it at the moment either. So.
We've got a similar thing St Pancras. We've got church groups which provide quite a lot of income normally. And I think that we've also taken the line at the moment, at least, that they can't come back in for all the reasons that Tricia was mentioning. One of the ideas we're working on is some kind of a shift system whereby we agree not to charge them any more rent, but we give them more hours so they can split it over a longer period. It's probably not going to be, well, certainly would not produce as much income as we had previously. And there's still quite a lot of risks we'd need to go through in terms of making sure the two shifts don't mingle. But at least it will produce some kind of an income and provide some kind of a service as well.
That's a good idea. I hadn't thought of that one.
Okay. Any other kind of the list that I kind of went through? Anything else that anyone else wants to discuss in the last 10 minutes? Sorry.
I think maybe one of our problems is people that believe in the pandemic being a thing and people who don't, and where that meets in a community space of holding everybody within the community when there's a really big divergence in understandings and approaches to the pandemic. Probably that's not resolvable, but it's very much I suppose an important part of what's happening in communities at the moment.
I suppose an element of that as well is that you're part of the public health message as well, aren't you, in terms of telling people that this is a pandemic and going through the kind of the risks to individuals. So I mean, to what extent are you having those conversations with the detractors who kind of don't believe that this is a real thing? And
well, the detractors are also part of our working group as well, so we have a big spectrum. Yeah.
Is anyone else having those conversations with people or trying to convince people who are skeptical about all of this?
We have a men's group that started a couple of weeks ago. Luckily, there's only six of them, and they're elderly gentlemen. And we've had some interesting discussions on that, and the fact that I'm all right, I don't need a mask. You know, it's just because they've been coming for a long time, they just feel that they can come in and it can all be the same as it was before. And it's a very tricky situation because you want them in the building to use the facilities and have the social interaction together, etc. But the trying to convince them that, you know, if you don't do this, I'm really sorry, but you can't come in. It can cause possible, you know, it hasn't yet, but it can cause possible issues in the future. And then staff being put in those situations, having to have them difficult conversations with people they may have been working with for a very long time, and saying, I'm really sorry, but you're not welcome in here if you're not going to follow our rules and the government guidance. I think that for staff and volunteers that have to have them conversations, I've had you know, a couple of conversations with my staff, and most of them are absolutely fine about it, but I don't think it's actually got to that situation yet. But if it does get to that situation, it might be a different picture, and I'm sure there's lots of people here, I can see lots of nodding heads, that are in that situation as well. So
I completely agree, Tricia. I think what we've done, our staff and volunteers have done, is probably not the best and the most ethical way of doing it, but we've blamed the government a lot, and local authorities will be like, well, you know, we wish that you could all just come in and eat like normal and have the masks and or not have the masks or do whatever you want, but unfortunately it's like when you tell people they're barred from a service because of your policies and procedures, which is not the best way to do it, but it does give you a sense of separation from it's me as a staff member's fault or it's me as a volunteer's fault that I'm making you wear a mask or not allowing you in the centre. It's the government's fault, and most of our clients hate the government. So I think it just provides some separation, but it's really difficult for people who, because if you think about it as well, if you didn't believe that it was a thing, you'd be really frustrated, And so also just the obvious common sense of understanding where they are and meeting them at their belief, and not dismissing it, but saying, you know, we are completely beholden to something bigger than us, which we haven't experienced before, so we're sorry. But we've had a lot of that, and I can see a lot of nodding, so you're not alone.
I'm afraid, even though I work for the council, I blame the council. In that sort of circumstance, I'm afraid I go down the line of, I'm terribly sorry, but if you don't do it, they'll close us down.
It's just easier because they'd rather have the service and obey the rules than not have the service at all. So it's just an easier way of doing it. I'm sorry, Chris. We blame you all the time.
That's fine. That's what councils are for.
Mention the health and safety executive coming around for an inspection. That would be good. Yeah.
We also do it so that we tell the practitioners, some of our practitioners have disagreed about certain protocols, and we just have to say exactly the same as well, that if they don't abide, that's how we're only able to offer the services. But to remind them that hopefully this is just a temporary thing, and just to keep reminding everybody that we're all doing the best that we can, and that hopefully it will all be ending soon. It's not a forever. I think that helps to remind people and allow them the space to be able to say, have that difference of opinion. But again, it's quite similar to everybody else. This is how it is. You wouldn't argue with a fire drill. If you was to come in, we have to give you our spiel, and that's part of the terms and conditions.
Okay, thanks. I think we've kind of come towards the end. One thing I wanted to ask though is that we can go away, and you know, there are lots of grey areas, as Charlotte says, and you know, in some cases we can go away and find out the information. In other cases, it's the case of us putting pressure on the relevant government department to make it clearer for organisations that we're working with. So yeah, we've got a list of things that we can come back to the group with, and I think that'd be really useful. But I think ending with, you know, the two messages of blame the government and this isn't forever, I think are two good messages to kind of to end with. So
That's
I'll
great.
hand back over to Kevin.
Great, thanks, David. Well, just really, I want to wind up. We've got 2 minutes, so I hope to let you go bang on time. So let me just say a big thanks to Charlotte and David. That was really useful. I think we've all learned a lot and had a good opportunity to have a discussion, because I think that maybe this is one of the things we've learned. Some areas have been clarified, but then it's also been clarified that some areas aren't clear. So we will just have to keep discussing, keep making judgments as best we can, I think, in some areas. And keeping an eye on the government's changing criteria. So we will be putting up on our website this recording and the PowerPoint and any other links and interesting things that people have put up in the chat. So we'll send you a link to that as soon as that's up. We'll try and get that up as soon as we can. And the forums are back. So we had a little break over August, but forums are happening again every 2 or 3 weeks. If you have suggestions for future ones, do let us know. There's a number of topics I know we need to cover coming up. The council released their BAME disproportionality report, so hopefully we'll get a follow-up forum on that. The council are also launching an interesting renewal commission, so I hope we'll get an update about that as well. We've invited the policy officers concerned to come along and talk about that. But there's a lot going on, the food distribution issue, and yeah, Castlehaven have got a really interesting event with Corporation Town. So I think food's going to be a big issue. So if you've got thoughts on future forums, do let us know. But for now, thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you at the next one.